Welcome to the Decoding Story-Based Marketing Podcast, where we help businesses create killer messaging that unlocks their marketing potential. In today's episode, we're talking about storytelling in marketing and product, how it can massively enhance your brand impact, and where a lot of companies get it wrong. I'm your host, Annie, and I am joined today by my Decoded Strategies co-founder, Kristen, and our amazing partner, Ben Hanzo, principal at Setpiece, a product strategy consulting firm. Hello, everybody. How you guys doing?
Hi, everybody.
Hi. Okay, so we have to start by naming, right now we are coming out of the Labor Day weekend. It is September, which to me always marks fall. Mm-hmm. And whenever I come into September, I think back to when I watched cable TV, when that was still a thing that I did. And like TV shows came back around, right? So there's so many things about fall I love, but there was always one that's still so deeply ingrained in me, which is, all my favorite shows are coming back. So that may not be the case anymore, but I want to know what you guys are watching on TV these days.
Well, number one, I'm having a very nostalgic moment. Remember when there was like a new season of Lost that came out? Did you guys watch Lost?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Remember every year, like when the first episode of Lost is coming out, I used to make themed snacks.
Right.
I really miss those days.
Oh, I do too.
Do you guys want to hear a fun, inside industry story about Lost?
Yes.
Okay,
Definitely.
so the executive who greenlit the Lost pilot, his name's Lloyd Braun, got fired basically because of greenlighting the Lost pilot. It was so expensive.
Oh.
But on his way out, the creator of the show, whose name
Damon Lindelof? Yeah.
had him record the last week on Lost or whatever, that he is the voice of that on his way out the door.
That's nuts. That's nuts.
Salt in the wound.
Yeah. Salt in the wound.
Yeah. He's doing fine.
I was going to say,
he's okay.
Probably fine.
He's okay. Anyway, so we're not 20 years ago right now, but ironically, I am watching shows from 20 years ago because I'm kind of in a phase of life where I don't want shows to hurt my feelings.
Sure.
And all shows kind of hurt my feelings right now. I just finished House of the Dragon, which nothing happened.
Oh,
Anyway,
yeah.
Nothing.
I'm watching Smallville again.
Yes,
I'm deep into Smallville. And I'm kind of obsessed with it. I'm listening to a rewatch podcast. And when I get into stuff, I get real into stuff.
Really?
I didn't know that. And try to get everyone else into it. So anyway, yeah, I'm real deep into season 6 of Smallville. Lex Luthor just went bad. Big time stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Ben, what about you?
We are working our way through Parks and Rec, which has been a delight. That is kind of like you always need your gap filler show on the night when it's actually too late to watch a real show because the kids were difficult getting to bed. And you just got to get something in before you fall asleep. And on my own, I'm watching a show called Industry on HBO, which I love, filled with emotional damage. And a lot of finance patter that you have to either try to understand or just let wash over you.
Yes.
But I mean, this season is very intense to the point where I have on multiple occasions had to pause the episode because I was overwhelmed.
Okay.
Sounds fun.
Yes, sounds fun, man.
But I love the cinematography, writing, all very on point.
Okay,
Awesome.
I need to add that to my list. I need to add that. Well, there's one show that I'm always watching, which is Grey's Anatomy. So I've just recently hit the threshold of season 15 or 16 where I can't keep going. So I start back from the beginning because I believe that the first 3 seasons of Grey's are some of the best seasons of television ever.
Agreed.
I love it. And interestingly, given the Lost topic, I am rewatching Fringe, which I watched when it was on. I think I rewatched it some point years later, and then we're now rewatching it, and I love it. I think it is one of J.J. Abrams' best pieces, and it's actually he's able to see through some of the things that he envisioned in a way that maybe he hasn't been able to do in anything else. So highly recommend Lost.
Wow.
Or sorry, no, not
Fringe.
Lost.
Fringe.
I mean, Fringe. Very good. Very, very good.
Well, and fun fact for our fans to go back to Parks and Rec a minute ago is we have our very own Leslie Knope here in the form of Annie Mossbacher. So she is Leslie Knope. We get to have her in our lives. We're very, very lucky.
I do love that show. It is a big part of my life. And one of my shining accomplishments in life is I now live in Pasadena, which means, for those of you that don't know, the Pasadena City Hall is where Pawnee City Hall was filmed. So I basically live in Pawnee, and every time I vote, I go to the voting box in downtown Pasadena where I can pretend to be Leslie Knope.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's pretty perfect. All right. Well, this is fun. So lots of good stories for people to seek out there, whether you're looking for emotional damage or whatever, Smallville, safety, lots of good options. And so, we talk all the time at Decoded and on this podcast and with all of our partners and clients about storytelling. It's a very important part of what we do and, really in the way that we relate to all of our clients and in the world, storytelling is a big deal. So we've also encountered that storytelling is now a big topic that exists out there in the zeitgeist, in particular in marketing. And storytelling can mean and be interpreted so many different ways. So as we get going in this conversation, I kind of want to just lay out on the table, how do we define storytelling when it comes to marketing and building a business? Kristen, I'm curious if you'd like to get us started.
Well, for me, I think like how we define story is very, very simple, which is a hero overcoming a problem to get a thing that they want. I think that that's like, it all boils down to that, a hero going on some kind of journey where they overcome a problem.
Mm-hmm. Ben, how do you define story?
I hadn't actually thought about this, but I think story is actually like one of the oldest human thought technologies that allows us to get our brains into an experience that we didn't have.
Mm-hmm.
So it's probably like one of the most transformational things we can do as humans, given our superpowers of having brains and language.
Yeah. Wow. That was pretty impressive. We have not thought about that before, right? Well, it's interesting, right? Because we all know immediately, like when we talk about storytelling, oh, yeah, I get what that is. We see this a lot with businesses who say, oh, we got to tell a story. But so often that doesn't actually lead to anything very well defined. It's a really difficult thing to define. So let's talk about where it goes wrong. Where have you seen companies really miss the mark when it comes to storytelling, and like what generally makes for a bad story?
Mm-hmm. Well, for me, even before I think about, okay, where have companies missed the mark? Because we usually know when companies are missing the mark, like that's just not working for me, but we don't quite know why. But for me, when I think about what makes a bad story, I think it is unnecessary detail. It's filling in a plot with a bunch of garbage that doesn't actually drive the story forward. Now, I don't mind a super robust, rich story. I love big epic novels, but every detail needs to support the plot. Every detail needs to push the hero towards accomplishing what they want. So when I'm like sitting and chatting with someone and they're telling me a story and I'm wondering, when is this going to end? It's usually because they did a bunch of side quests. Like, I don't actually care about that cousin's, baby's, brother's teddy bear, and so I would say, which I might have just done in this story. Unnecessary detail is the thing. So I see that going wrong when I look at how companies do it, because to me, that's feature-based marketing. Where it's just we're filling in all of this detail without understanding how does this support the greater plot. Curious what you think about that, Ben.
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think about how this goes most wrong in my world. And I think similar, it's the lack of editing and a unwillingness to do hard work to create something coherent, meaning we're unwilling to edit out things that are like, we're not willing to kill our babies, right? We're unwilling to edit out things that we have some conviction around. And we're not willing to include in the story, the actual beginning and end, which is like what is going to happen for our customers when they're using this thing. And so that context of like, the bad product stories tend to be like, this is what's going to happen. Like these are the action. And we don't know how we got there or where we're going.
That's fascinating. Ben, talk to us a little bit about how you see story playing a role in product strategy.
Yeah. So for me, I think product overall is a storytelling function in that PMs, the sort of knock on product management is like, you don't do anything, right? Like PMs don't write code, they don't design, they're not, writing marketing copy, like they don't do anything. But fundamentally, when product is at its best, is when it's creating the narrative that aligns in a lot of ways the company around what value we're delivering to customers. And I think you can get hung up on that necessarily being just words. That's usually like words and pictures and numbers. But when you listen to anybody talk about what makes folks good at product, writing is usually number one on the list. And communication, right? So being able to deploy a narrative across the company is essentially product strategy. And that's not my definition. That comes from a woman, Melissa Perry, who wrote like one of my favorite books on product strategy. But when we talk about product strategy, what we're really talking about is, can we align the company around a narrative around what value are we going to deliver to customers in this period of time, and what impact is that going to have on our business?
Do you find, kind of coming back to Kristen's point around like that sort of unnecessary detail, to me, the world of product is like a massive set of all of the detail that could ever exist ever. So do you find that sometimes is a struggle, or that plays a part in like bad storytelling, which is just to throw absolutely everything at everyone all the time?
Yeah. I mean, in any design or building of anything, you have to figure out what level of fidelity you're at, right? So if you're talking to investors, it's one level of fidelity. If you're talking to the whole company, it's a different one. If you're talking to an engineering and product team about a specific thing they're going to build, it's a different one. And, good product folks have to be able to telescope through all those things and know which are the very important small details to pull up into the higher level narrative to really like make the point, and which are the very important high level goals or strategy things to pull into that low level context so that we have the right constraints on where we're spending our time.
Telescoping, what an interesting term that is. And Kristen, I don't know that we've ever really thought about that particular term, but I know something you talk about all the time is kind of distilling the ideas when it comes to brand messaging and positioning, distilling the ideas down to their most crucial form. Talk to me a little bit about like what that exercise looks like for brands who have a lot of things to say, a lot of details. How can they start to really think about honing those in and distilling that idea?
Well, I think it's so important that if we're going to distill anything, we know what we're trying to distill down into instead of just what's cool. Because I think that is where we fall sometimes. It's like, what's cool, what's different from the competition, instead of thinking, what is our North Star? What are the questions that we're trying to distill down into, instead of just being all over the place. There's a point what I'm about to say. I've been thinking about a lot about how movies have changed lately, where, movies are so long and they're so bloated now, and there's so much garbage in them. And then it's hard to find that through line. And I look back to like Men in Black, which I think came in at like 89 minutes.
Oh,
it's so short.
Perfect.
And it's like a perfect movie because it was so focused and knew exactly what it was trying to do. So same thing with distilling. It's like, what are we trying to distill down into? So for us, we use this StoryBrand framework, which means we ask very specific questions. We're not just like, hey, tell me about your product. Tell me about this. We're like, no, what outcome does your customer want? What are you delivering to them that's going to give them that? What problem do they solve? How does that show up for them? So for me, distilling really means making sure that you're answering very specific questions and getting it down to its most pure, simple, conversational form. And being willing to say, I don't know what that means. That's like, I think, honestly, my great superpower is I don't know what you're talking about. And I'll tell you, I don't know what you're talking about. But really, if it's not absolutely abundantly clear, it means we haven't gotten clear enough yet.
Yeah. Oh, it's so good. You're really, really good at that. And not just to, I don't know what that means. But I think it can be so tempting, whether you're building a story internally at a company, right? And like trying to really, communicate effectively across a business, or from a marketing perspective, it can be so easy to slip into insider language. I know this thing so well, so I don't have to explain it in a really universal perspective. And so I think that that's really important.
Yeah.
So Ben, I'm just really curious. Again, we look at this so kind of distinctly from communicating effectively with a customer type of audience. Like, where does that insider language or highly technical concept come into play in storytelling on the product side? Because I think you have to translate stories to a technical audience and then to a non-technical audience. And I know that's something you do exceptionally well. And so how can story be a good vehicle to be able to do that?
Yeah. So there's two directions. One direction is, how do we bring the customer context and need into the team? So we have some group that is going to build something, and the bad way to do that is to give them a list of stuff. The good way to do that is to give them a well-crafted problem, an understanding of what our goals are as a company, and a time box, and to basically say, you got 6 weeks. Here's the problem we're trying to solve. Here's a bunch of information about our customers and what they need. You all know our existing capacities. So why don't you all figure out what can we get done in that period of time? Because we think that's the amount of time that's valuable to spend on this problem.
Yeah.
And so that's the sort of bringing customer context into the design process. Then the flip side of that is, how do we, with empathy and understanding, bring technical constraint into customer conversation in a way that actually matters, right? Because fundamentally, nobody really cares that like, oh, if I want to do a 10,000 record export, it's going to be very hard on the system. They're like, I just want my export to run.
Right.
But there is some ability to create like what some people have called like empathy for the machine, as long as you're not like pushing it too hard, to just be like, well, you can do this thing, but if you do all this stuff, it's going to take longer. And like, you can kind of build an understanding of the system works in a certain way because computers have some limitations. And assuming that you have actually done a thoughtful job of working with it in those to deliver value to your customers, there is a way to say, okay, well, you can achieve your goal if you do X, Y, and Z, and these maybe feel a workaroundery or like a little bit different, but fundamentally, like it's because the system works this way. And so that's the way we have to do it. And you don't want to over-index on that, but you do want to sort of help bring the mental model of like what the computers are doing to enough, at least to the internal teams, if not all the way to the customer, so that when you're at the edge, when you're having those customer conversations, usually in CS more than in sales, that there's like a good understanding of why things are the way they are, so that we're pointing the customer in the right direction.
One of the things that I think story is so powerful, where marketing and product can align and really collaborate, is, Ben, you'll be able to talk about this better and more eloquently than I will, but like a lot of customers say, I need X or I need X button to push because that's how I've done it, or that's how I've been told I can do it. But I think the work of really brilliant product strategists is like, okay, well, that's one way of doing what you need, but let's get underneath that and actually talk about, okay, what are you trying to accomplish? What are your problems? But that needs to be translated back to the customer who's thinking, but I've always pushed button X in the past. You're telling me now I need to do ABC. And so translating the kind of reasoning behind that and the value that comes from it, I think that's a really critical part of storytelling across the stack.
It's kind of the difference between want and need. Like, I have small kids who want candy all day long.
Yeah.
And so my ongoing challenge is to invite them into a healthful way of living. Now, I love candy, but to invite them into a healthful way of living, to help them understand, okay, I know that is what you want right now, but your body is going to function better. Protein's going to help you build muscles, and vegetables are going to give you, all that stuff. So I think about that for customers. Like, yes, you want that button. Yes, you do. But how do I invite you into a new story that actually gives you what I know you need, which is grounded in the problem you solve?
Yeah, I mean, I was listening to a conversation the other day about where should product managers or people who want to be product managers be spending time before they become product managers, or where could folks who do product management come from? And this person was making a pretty good argument for sales. And his argument was good sales processes are very similar to good product discovery processes. We're listening to the customer, we're asking them questions, we're discovering their problems. We're then helping them understand how their problems align with our solution. And so like, we're not going off and building something for them, but fundamentally, like, we got to go to customers every day and get them to give us money. And it tends to be much more effective to do that through building a shared narrative of how our solution is going to help solve their problem than to just try to shove them through a process.
Okay, well, listeners, stay tuned for a future episode where we're going to talk about why product managers should spend some time on sales, because I love that. So something that we see a lot is founders or business leaders, when thinking about story, they come in really hot and they're really excited to talk about their story or the company's origin story. I won't get too soapboxy on this, but one of my least favorite questions is, okay, well, what's our why? Like, what's the why? And I know the origin of that, and there's like a whole bunch, we'll say it another time. But the reason that I don't like that is it immediately kind of turns the table to us as a brand, us as a business, us as leaders. What's our why? Why did we do this? And it just immediately takes you away from focusing on the needs of your customer.
Yeah.
So I really want to kind of talk about what can we do to help reframe the mindset for a leader on storytelling, not so much about their story, but starting to talk about the story of their customer. So Kristen, how do you help to kind of reframe that when you talk to founders who are just not approaching it from the right angle?
Well, ironically, my big question, if I'm talking to a founder that's saying, I want to figure out how to tell my story, is I want to ask them why. Why do you need that to happen? What do you want? Because is it that you want to be greater known in the world? In which case, let's explore that. Or are you wanting to grow your business and think that this is a path to do it? If that's the case, why does that matter to your customer? And then I would push it even further and say, yes, your story matters, but only so much as it shows them that you're the guy that they're looking for, that you have an empathy for what they're going through because of a lived experience and a solution to help them. Which brings us back to our StoryBrand framework on being the guide and not the hero. So I want to know why. And if you want to serve your business, then you need to position yourself as guide. And that's the way that you tell your story.
Totally. Ben, do you find this to be, do you ever encounter this as a common challenge from the like internal perspective, that there are like, different components of leadership that might put pressure on the story that needs to be told? Is this something that kind of exists more in marketing? I'm curious if you've encountered anything like this.
Yeah, I think one thing this makes me think about is mission. And mission became very popular at tech companies in particular in the last 15 years. And I don't think customers care about what the mission of the company is. The mission is an internal narrative framework to help employees find purpose in the work they're doing. And that can bleed out into both our prioritization decisions on the product and how we talk about the value to customers. Because the problem with mission can often be, we serve blah. And it's like, okay, well, now we have to, from a product perspective, meet the needs of a very poorly defined ICP or a very poorly defined job to be done, because our mission is to serve all creators. And we have to live up to the mission because that's why we're all here.
Right.
And it does a huge disservice to basically everyone in the company as the CEO and founder to not create some constraints on that and say, okay, yes, long-term in the whatever, on the infinite timeline, we will eventually serve all creators. We know that we can't do that today and we have to have some focus. So these are the folks we're going to focus on right now. And this is our strategy to take the mission and put it into like, what are we going to do this quarter, this year?
Yeah. Well, I think the reality is there are so many stories that can be told about the origin of a company, why a company exists, why a product has been built, how we are bringing that to the type of people that really need it. But it sounds like the mistake that's often made is telling the wrong story at the wrong time. And so when it comes to the mission, there is a place and an audience for that story, and that may not be in your marketing. When it comes to your marketing, your origin story is probably not the first thing that you tell. And so all of these things are an important part of the DNA of your company, your product, your brand, but finding the right place to tell the right story that's going to move people, ideally your customers, and your customer might be your team, your employees, or people that are literally going to buy your product, move them forward in the journey. And that's really where you can find the sweet spot. Awesome. Well, as you know, storytelling really important to us as a business. And so if you ever want to learn more about story, reach out to any of us because we will nerd out with you on that for a very long time. But I think it's so fascinating to tease out some of the ways that story shows up, both from an internal and product management perspective, and really the type of story that you need to tell to drive people to purchase your product. So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining the Decoding Story-Based Marketing Podcast. If this was helpful, please subscribe, leave us a rating. And for more information on Decoded Strategies, you can visit us at decodedstrategies.com or connect with us on LinkedIn. Thanks so much for joining, and we will talk to you soon.